So this is going to be a quick video on how to open a car and how to wheel swap it, and then we'll probably go into adding weights and stuff too. But first you need a 9/64 drill bit to take off the rivet. You need a 5/64 to drill the screw hole, and I also use a 1/16 to drill a pilot hole before the screw hole, just because sometimes with the 5/64 you might go out of the side. So this is just a little precision for me using the 1/16. It's not necessary, I just like doing it. So today we're gonna wheel swap the Yesco's wheels over to the Skyline. And so first we're gonna open the Yesco. And to do that, I start with the 5/64 and I just drill a pilot hole so that the 9/64 has a better seat. And when I drill, I do pulses. Unless I'm doing a slow drill, then I'll hold it for longer. Let's just hit both at the same time. And when you're drilling, you want to go square, perpendicular with the direction of the base. Otherwise, you're going to drill out of the side of the post. Switching to the 9/64 drill bit. And start slow. And for me, I start slow, and then once I'm centered, then I'll just push down really hard and pulse once, and it'll take off the whole rivet. Sometimes it doesn't do it that easily, but this time it was. So that's all it took to take the car apart. So now we're just gonna remove everything else, keep the base. Let's do the Yesco. And you're gonna want to use good drill bits and sharp ones. The duller they are, the more trouble you will have taking these rivets off. So I didn't really center that one properly. You can kind of see where there's a little bit still there hanging, which won't be a problem because that'll just pop off. So let's... That is off now, and since I still have that thing hanging, that's not even there. If I ever have anything hanging off that though, I just take some pliers and bend it off. So now we're gonna go over how to remove the wheels from the base. So what I do is I just use the smallest flathead I can find, stick it up under there, and you want to work as closely as you can to these tabs so that you don't bend the axle. Let's go this way. So I'll just stick it under there and pry. There you go. Let's get this side out, pop out, and we're good to go. It's axle 1. And now for axle number 2. Sometimes it'll be really hard to actually get this to pry up because these are so tight, these tabs. So if you want to make it easier, then just pry up on those tabs a little bit. These tabs are not important unless you have a metal base. And even then, most likely you're going to cut them off anyways. In this case, I don't want to bend these. I'm having a little harder of a time than I want to. So I'll just cut the one tab that's alone. And now it's going to be a lot easier. And like I was saying before, these tabs are not necessary if you're doing a plastic base. because your two options to reattach the axles are to either glue them in place, which if you're going to glue them, you don't need those anyways. But if you don't glue and you just keep your axles free spinning, then the interior is actually what keeps it down, not these tabs. These tabs really just keep the axles on. I like having the tabs because then I can flip the base over without the axles just falling out, which gets really annoying. So let's get the skyline free. This one's a lot easier, there's more room. So the further away from these tabs you pry from, then the more chance you have of bending the axles themselves. That's why I try to get as close as I can to the tabs when I pry. So now that we're done there, we can shove these axles on, but we're just gonna pry these up a little bit so that they slide in easily. There we go. Pry that. You can always bend them back in place after, which I usually do. So there goes axle 1. And axle 2 just goes in easily as well. And then I'll bend these down a little bit just so that there's some kind of a hold, so that when I flip the car over, the axles don't just come tumbling out. So there we go. And that is how you do an axle swap. But before we finish, I'm going to show you how to drill the pilot holes, which, as I mentioned previously, I start with the 1/16 so that I can drill a more precise hole. And so with my screws, I use 256 screws. These are 3/16 inch in length. And I either use 3/16 or a quarter. I don't often use a quarter, but I only use those if I've taken a little too much post off, or if I've stripped the holes that I made for the 3/16, then I'll drill a slightly deeper hole and then use the 1/4. A lot of people like to use 1/8, but I like a little more bite on my drill or my screws, just in case impact or whatever. And so I just drill straight. I think people generally advise you not to push when you drill, but I actually do a lot of pushing. So that's all good for the pilot hole. Now I'm going to switch to the 5/64, and this one will be a lot easier since it's just going to widen the hole. Done there. That's also done. So now we're all done with the skyline. All you got to do now is put it back together. And if you did a good job on drilling out the rivet, then you should be able to just kind of lock these without a screw. If you've drilled off a little too much post, then the base does not stay on the body. So now my 2 screws. You don't need a tap because the metal on the post, the metal on the die-cast cars is really soft. So all you have to do is I just reverse a little bit to make sure it's centered, and then you just screw in. So that's done. And now this one. And that's all done. So now we have a wheel swapped R30 Skyline. Okay, now let's get into adding weights. So the weights that I use are little curtain weights that come in 1-inch squares. And each one weighs anywhere between 10 to 11 grams, which is pretty nice to have that increment. Because if I'm building for a certain weight class, then I figure I just need 2 of them to add 20 grams, 3 of them to add 30, whatever. So this is how my weights look when they come out of the bag. They are these wrapped up pieces. And so I'm gonna just cut these open and take them out so you can see what they look like. And I believe I build differently from most people in that I use very little glue. I actually tape all my weights together. And if I can, I will tape them to the base as well. Glue I've found to break loose sometimes, just based on impact. You know, if it receives a hard impact, your weights might break free. I don't think I'm going to use all 4 weights here. I'm just pulling them out just in case. But you can see some of these are not flat. What I do when I get those is I just hammer it with my scissors. So right there with the flat of my scissors, I'll just hammer that, flip it over, hammer it flat again. Those are good, or that one's good. This one's really bent. That's straight now. These are all flat now. These weights, the thing I like about them are they are very malleable. So they're very easy to work with, they're easy to cut. You can cut them using scissors or pliers. I actually like using a nail cutter because I have a really nice flat straight line right there that applies equal pressure all the way through. I've tried cutting these before with scissors and it usually causes some deformation because it'll start to spread as you're cutting through because of the thickness of the blades themselves. So when I build, so in these actually fit perfectly left to right. So the way I'm going to build this, and the way I do all of my weights, is I usually fill the bottom square rectangle with 1 layer of weight, and then as I work my way up, I will put it a little further back, so that it's kind of like a wedge in its shape. And typically I like having a lot of weight behind or in front of the rear axle, behind the driver, because the weight here is what drives the car forward. I've done builds before where the weights are completely centered, which it can work sometimes, but the cars do spin out a lot. When the cars drift sideways, they will be quick to turn around just because of the center of gravity is in the center. Whereas if I have my weights a little tilted further back, then this will keep the car going forward. Some people build with front bias, where a lot more weight's in front. What that does to your build is there isn't enough weight on the back wheels, so when you're exiting a curve, the back is going to be wandering, looking for traction. So you want weight over the back axle, or not over, but you want more weight in the back than you do typically in the front, so that it can continue to drive the car forward. So for these weights also come with kind of a flared edge right there, so I will hammer that flat. So now we have a flat edge. I've warped this a little bit, so whenever I warp it a little bit, I'll just hammer that flat again. So now we have the flat edges and flat piece. Now I'm going to put this there. This other one I'm actually going to cut with the nail cutters I was just talking about. And how I determine where to cut is I will place them on top of each other. And now this gives me a line to cut on, which I don't know where I'm... Here it is. I'll use my permanent marker, fine tip. I'll draw that line right there. Now that's where I'm cutting with my nail cutters. And I want the flat, it doesn't matter. Oop. There goes my line to cut. And there we go. So I'm going to use this on the upper level in order to stack the weights and move them backwards, as I mentioned before. So now this weight, I'm actually going to put this smaller one in the back. I really need to fix this camera, prevent it from falling. So now this weight's going to go in the back. And then this weight in front. So now that's our first level. Next level up. And probably only going to use this 30 grams that I'm adding. So this is kind of the way I build. Sometimes I will kind of make a tail on the back. On certain cars that'll help. That won't always help though. I'm not going to do it on this example. But the way that I'm going to build this now, I mentioned before that I like to tape my weights. So that's what we're going to do, is tape these weights. I use duct tape when I'm doing this. This is a little too wide of a piece. So I'm going to just use this piece. And what we're going to do place that there, tape that there. That's good to go. Next level. Actually, I'm going to use the bigger one. This one's next. By the way, this is still going to require testing. It's not just going to be built and that's it. This is what I feel like I should be building with, and then once I test, I'll make minor adjustments, which typically is going to be me adding weight a little bit further back. But this is my weight build. If you want to conceal the weights a little bit, you can just use a permanent marker and paint this black. But this is my weight. Now, a lot of people, most people, they will glue their axles in, which all you need to do is get some JB Quick. I'm not going to do it in this example, but mix yourself a little JB Quick and then use some toothpaste to pick up the JB Quick and then just make a nice ball here. Some people glue under the axle and over. I only do over. Sometimes if you do JB Quick under the axle, it'll cause the axle to sit a little higher just because there's material under there, and that may cause rubbing on the wheel to the fender. So with the JB Quick, you just apply both JB to both axles, and then you leave it in the, where is this? The axle jig, which you can get from Slanman Customs. So let's just pretend I've put the glue on there. The way that I will set this axle jig up is to just slide it back and forth a few times to make sure that it's centered. Each piece is centered with the axles, I mean. So right now, okay, right there. So I'll do that first and then put the glue. And then as you glue, you want to make sure the axles are in the center right there, so you have equal amounts of room on both sides for the wheel to move, both sides, and then just set it onto the axle jig. And then you usually want to put some kind of a weight on it so that it keeps the axles against the base, which I'm not doing that right now, so I'm just going to show you how I do it, which most of my builds are free spin axles. And to do that, I keep the interior. Now, the way that I'm able to keep my interior is I usually cut out the seats, which I'll typically either use a Dremel or I will use my Snips if it's easy to cut. In this case, I probably want to use a Dremel just for simplicity, but I want to make sure first. Okay, so in this case, actually, the interior is too wide. I mean, the weights are too wide for me to cut the seats out only, as it'll cause the plastic here from the interior to actually get pushed out by the weights. So for this particular build, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut off the front and the back and hold on to these axle holding parts. So to do that, I will use these snips typically. And all right, I want to cut it in a way that I can still use this part for the windshield. So I'm going to cut along here. And once I've done that, you can usually just pry it and break it. So this is going to stay up here in the front. And make sure that it can sit down flat, because sometimes this won't sit flat. And if that's the case, then I will put a little padding right above here so that the body pushes that down. Now for the back, I'm going to cut it in front of the rear seats right there. I prefer to just cut the seats out if I can, because it's a lot easier to keep track of and put the car back together. In this case, I can't do it, so I'm forced to just use the ends. So now that we've got that completed, let's test fit everything. Now we're putting on the windshield, and now for the body. And there you go. That is a modded Hot Wheels Skyline. So I didn't test this before I modded it, but I imagine the car was probably a 17-18 second car just because it didn't have very good rollers to start. So I'm going to show you what this runs right now before I add lube. Man, these are garbage up here. You can hear the rattling. Those are not good axles. The backs are a lot better. I'm probably going to end up switching out the front axles for some axles that match the back, just so that they'll be faster. So I just realized I forgot to glue my weights down. So I'm going to just use some hot glue, put it onto the duct tape because the hot glue sticks better to the duct tape, and then just push it right down. I normally tape my weights in if there's enough overlap of the body and the base, because that overlap will keep the tape wedged and will prevent it from coming up. And I prefer doing that versus gluing the weights in because I have more faith in that physical hold rather than just the glue bonding, which could be good, could be bad. I try not to put too much glue. Well, actually, in this case, I should put more just because I don't have the tape also holding it down. But that's it right there. Now the weights are glued. Reassemble the car. Seats in the back. Front part. Glass. And we have a completed wheel swapped and weighted vehicle. Next thing that I will do is lube the car, which you've already seen one of my lube videos, probably. If you haven't, go check it out. I've found that I'm actually pretty good at lubing. That's one of my strongest things about modding cars is how well I lube. I don't do any polishing of my axles just because I'm lazy. I should do it more, but I don't want to spend an hour or two polishing the axles to make them roll well. I'm sure I will once I start competing against people that beat me with my current build method, or once I start losing more often. But as of right now, I don't want to invest the extra time. So I just lube.
Hey, John.
Yeah, buddy?
I want to race cars.
You want to race cars?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the test run for the Skyline. It is not lubed yet. It's just got the wheel swap. I did change out the front axles for some better ones. Didn't make that big of a difference. But this is just a wheel swap with some decent wheels and the weight that was added. So stock time was in the 18 seconds or so. It was a pretty crap stock car. The axles were not good. They rattled a lot. But this is what it runs now. And that is a 15.478 with no lube.